Welcome back to Henry Harrison's Entrepreneurs Business and Finance podcast featuring Kep Kepner of Kepner CPA.com. Before we get started, like and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Henry Harrison podcast, Entrepreneurs Business and Finance. We are very happy today to have Kep Kepner. I'll have to ask about, I think the nickname's probably obvious, Kepner and Kep, but see if there's any history to that. And he is a repeat entrepreneur, and he presently has two companies, one called Kepner CPAs, which makes sense since that's his last name, and another one called Mindsmarts, which I'll let him explain. Well, hello, Kep.
Hi, how are you, Henry? Thanks for having me on. I've always known that I was going to be in business for myself. And my dad was a small business owner. He manufactured awnings and windows and storm doors and those kind of things in Wichita, Kansas. And I went to work for him during the summers and made a lot of mistakes, learned about business. So I've known from the start of my life that I was going to be in business for myself. And
How about that? Yeah, that's really, so you had a good role model and some good examples to learn from, it sounds like.
he wasn't the best role model. He also taught me I didn't want to be in his business. So when you have a family business, a lot of my clients are family-owned businesses. There's all the family dynamics that are involved in that. And that can really mess with the business decisions that need to be made. In my case, it was really a blessing when my dad said he couldn't afford me after I got out of grad school. And so I went out at that point on my own and started my career. He wasn't the best business role model, but working in his company was just great because I made mistakes when I was 15, 16, 17 through college at summer jobs. I made mistakes that I didn't have to make when I was in my 20s then. So it was great.
Since we went down, you're obviously doing very well with these two companies, and I want to get to that. But since you talked about mistakes and role models, you have a non-traditional path. Why don't you share a little bit about that and then share a little bit about your real estate ventures
Sure.
before you started your accounting firm that you now have?
So I started out in sales with a division of IBM called the Service Bureau Corporation. And so I found out that I was a marginal salesman. So that was a scary point for me to think, okay, I've got all these skills and a reasonable communicator, and yet I was marginal. And so what happened in that period of time is that I think I see it today in a lot of younger people. I was chasing the next greatest technology and went to about four different technology firms. And in each case, I was a marginal salesman. And I decided, at least I guess I was intuitive enough to say, this really isn't working. Don't want to do it a fifth time. I found a CPA firm in Dallas called Alfred Maroney and Company, and I went to work in their consulting department. And at that time, one of the things that we did was design and implement computer systems for small businesses. And that was where I was able to use my ability to communicate and my work that I'd had in the technology world to bring it to bear. And what I learned about me is that when I was selling something that I had control over, I could sell like crazy. It was when I sold something for somebody else that I was marginal. So I don't know what that tells about me, but when I went to work for Alfred Maroney and Company, all of a sudden I was able to sell all kinds of business. I think it had to do with the fact that whenever I said something to a client, I could make sure it happened. And that wasn't always the case in other jobs I had. So we merged into, say again?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
We merged into Arthur Young and I became an Arthur Young partner. So everybody thinks that's the pinnacle of success in the accounting world. For me, I didn't belong there. They were working with the companies like TI and other large companies here in Dallas. And I was used to an environment where I was dealing with the business owner and working with them and seeing their successes and their flaws. And that even though that's a highly prestigious world to be a partner in the big, at that time, the big eight accounting firms, that wasn't the place for me. So I raised a bunch of venture money, bought a company that built bank buildings. And that was something to stray from my consulting activities. And the tax law changed. And at the time I entered that marketplace, they were building new bank buildings everywhere, and they were building real estate everywhere. And we hit a downturn in the real estate market. So if somebody wanted a new bank, they would just go at the end of some shopping center that was unleased, put a drive in there, and they'd be in business. They didn't need a bank building of their own. So I was in a business. I had six venture partners. At that time, the lead investor was the 20th largest bank in the US, Republic Bank here in Dallas. And there were five other big venture firms that backed the purchase of this business. And it was the wrong business at the wrong time, or the right business at the wrong time, or something like that. And the reality is the market dried up and we were unable to shift well enough to another marketplace. That was a really interesting time. I remember when we closed that business down, we still had assets and it wasn't typical. We didn't go bankrupt, but these wonderful venture capitalists who were all in favor of this deal, at the end, they just wanted me to sign some note for, in that case, it was like $200,000, and said, we want you to sign this note just in case you make some money in the future. We want it. So when they earned the name Vulture Capital in that case, and when you think about what happens to business owners and entrepreneurs using third party money, what really happened, in addition to the market change, which was significant,
And let me
my
just
sponsor,
interject for those that don't know. This was in the 80s in Texas,
yeah, late 70s, yeah, 80s.
late 70s, 80s. And that was a time when they had savings and loan crisis, and
Yes.
there were mass, and you didn't go bankrupt, as you said, there were mass bankruptcy. And in fact, famously, former governor and Treasury Secretary John Connolly filed for personal bankruptcy. So if you got a former governor and people at that level, sometimes no matter how smart you are, or who you know, or where you are, it can be bad if you're not really well protected. How many buildings did you build and
Probably
finish
built
out?
about 30 buildings.
30 buildings. And so
Yeah.
you were dealing with a lot more than $200,000.
Yeah, but at that time, that was over the course of several years, and it was
But they wanted that last 200, which was be worth more like half a million today,
or maybe a million today.
maybe a million probably. Yeah.
So they were looking out for themselves. I learned a couple of other really great things that people ought to know. My sponsor was at Republic Bank. He was the guy that brought me in to meet the people and decide that they wanted to do this deal. And Republic Bank merged with InterFirst Bank. And when they did, InterFirst had a bigger merger and acquisition program than Republic did. So my sponsor was looking out for himself. He didn't want to carry something in to the new bank that might reflect on him later. So it really got down to that. It was the marketplace for sure, but it got down to that single person that was trying to cover his own butt when he was going to be merged into somebody else. And so you have to look at all these kind of things when you use outside parties. And that's what happened to me. Fortunately, before I started that, when I was at Alfred Roning Company, we were even though we were on the consulting side, we were required to have our CPA. So I had my CPA. And when this company went down and I was booted up to chairman of the board, it sometimes happens with no salary, and they closed the business on me. I started Kepner CPA in my bedroom. So that's the way this firm got started. And there are 8 people right now.
And some of this may have been a little later than what you had happened, but because I guess I don't know when the savings and loan, when all the really bad devastation hit, but I met some real estate developers. They were partners with banks. So back then, savings and loans would be a partner, kind of like a VC. You wouldn't have that today. And then the RTC, an arm of the federal government, took over the bank and called the loan.
Oh,
But the deal with the
absolutely.
developer was the bank is a financial partner. So they weren't ever planning on calling a loan because they were in on it together as partners. But once the government took it over, it's okay, we have this outstanding money. You're the developer. And so they would get wiped out.
Absolutely. Happen every day. And during that, fortunately, I had a little bit of money and I was starting to build my accounting practice. So I was not devastated financially, but it was very hard on my family for sure. It's interesting, during that period of time, I had 2 car wrecks. Neither were my fault. Now, why did that happen? Probably because I wasn't paying attention. I was distracted. Turns out they were not my fault. But at the same time, when somebody has this great amount of stress in their life, things happen. And when you have an entrepreneurial spirit about you, you figure you can get through that in some way. But that's really hard from time to time, and probably more hard on a family than on the entrepreneur themselves.
That is really, I was just going to say that had to be a very stressful time, but your sense of persevering and optimism and can do, smart, whatever, pulled you through that. Probably also the support of your family,
Yeah,
even though
well,
they were
it
having a hard
was,
time.
I lost my family during that time.
Oh,
Went through a divorce. That's what happens sometimes in all of that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a difficult time. And most people, the word today, vulnerability, has a really bad meaning to a lot of business people. They don't want to be vulnerable. But I've subscribed to Brene Brown, who says that vulnerability is the most measurable action of courage that exists. When somebody starts a business, they really are at their most vulnerable. They're giving up a job, security supposedly from all that, and they're going into the unknown. There's a Zen principle called Shoshin, and Shoshin defines vulnerability as a period of not knowing. And so the entrepreneur is somebody who really, as it is at their greatest strength, when they recognize their vulnerability, their not knowing, and they go out and risk whatever they have, their own individual psyche and money and effort. They risk all of that to start a business. And business owners who are vulnerable, in my way of looking at it, they're vulnerable because they're starting a business, they're undergoing massive change like AI, they're at the end of their business career. They're thinking about selling their business, even the act of hiring employees. All of these actions that entrepreneurs take, they they're at a time of their greatest vulnerability because they don't know how it's going to turn out. But that's actually their time of greatest strength. So I think I was really vulnerable at the time I started the building company. And I was very vulnerable when I started my CPA practice in my bedroom with no clients. So that's pretty vulnerable right there. And I had to provide for my family during all that time. I think that entrepreneurs are a different breed because when you're vulnerable, that's the time when your creativity takes hold. And that's when you see things that other people don't see. And that's what allows you to start that company or to build it or to grow it or eventually to sell it to somebody or pass it on. I'm a big believer in the American entrepreneur. I believe most of them build companies and can be trusted. I believe that they earn that trust and are trusted. I believe that the few bad apples that we see in the entrepreneurial world, they're only ruining the apples in their own barrel and they aren't ruining everybody else. And maybe it's because I'm an entrepreneur myself. I have such faith in the American entrepreneur and the small business owner.
You have a lot of clients that are entrepreneurs and small business owners. I bet you have that perspective as well.
Yes, you're right. I get to see things that work and don't work. And I see that in my clients. I probably have 700 clients. Some are CPA firms, so some are just tax clients, but probably 100 plus are small business owners, some with multiple businesses. And I can see the way they make decisions. I can see what works. I can see how to fix them and their families. And so I have a really good ringside seat at the entrepreneurial world.
And one of the things that you offer is you have other value add services. So you say a certain number are just tax people. What are the other people?
So the
So
others
you're
are
providing
just,
just, yeah, you're
yeah.
providing just tax services, a tax return basically but then you have other services as well.
I'm so proud, Henry. This year I only did one tax return myself. Yay! I'm really proud of that. We
Well,
start
have a
with
team. You have a team, obviously, within your
yes, I have a team
company,
here.
people that work for you. And so
Yes.
you don't necessarily be the one that does it, but if they need advice or those kind of things, I'm sure they come to you.
Yeah, we've trained our folks really well. And I've always felt like that when you're a CPA and you work with small businesses or any person, you have an opportunity to learn. It's not about the technicalities of accounting or doing a tax return or things like that. It's about learning how they exist in the life of your clients. We've got a really good learning opportunity for our staff here. And so we start with really strong accounting for our clients. And we add CFO level guidance and we add Mindsmarts high performance brain training for better decision making. And when I talk about Mindsmarts, people say,
And let
Kep,
me just stop you 1 second to make
sure.
sure we make it clear, because I want to give a broad perspective for your accounting firm, because you help with software, you help with financial consulting, with business advisory, and MindSmarts is a part of that. MindSmarts is also a separate company.
Yeah,
And before we move on to MindSmarts, because I don't think I know, even your CPA firm your background is non-traditional. MBA, a salesman, we didn't even talk about you getting your MBA, but finance, then a construction company in real estate, then a CPA firm, started from scratch again. Your father was an entrepreneur. Talk a little bit about how I think most people think about it, a CPA firm. You pay a tax return maybe a bit differently. You may just get a bill, but other services are a lot of times by the hour. For the most part, lawyers are that way too. But you've done something different. I'd really like you to share that
So,
if you could.
so yeah, it's becoming a little more popular to think about being a fractional CFO or a fractional controller for a small business. And so in those cases, we work on a retainer basis and we have to define what the workload looks like. But nonetheless, we become part of the company in the sense that we're their financial people. And I've always felt like I wanted the smallest business client we have to have available to them the same kind of financial knowledge that a Fortune 500 company has. because they can get that from us. And so I think sometimes entrepreneurs are unprepared for the financial side of their business. And so when we act in that role, then we become their financial vice president, so to speak. Now, it's a little different because we're still independent. We're not employees of that company, and that's really important. I've always felt like if somebody hired me to be their controller, that'd be a lousy decision because when you become part of the company as an employee, you become part of the problem. And so when you're an outsider helping in that arena, you have objectivity and you're serving other people, not just this single client. And so you have the platform to tell people the way you see it, and you have a chance to solve problems for a company instead of being part of it. That's the way we approach it for our clients.
And then I think that leads in because obviously a company called Mindsmarts is probably not something most people think that they're going to be drawn to from their CPA. So you're bringing in more of a consulting, uh, I'll call that background, and then and company separate, but tied in with your CPA firm. I'll let you explain it because I'm not doing it justice.
So thanks, Henry. It's not unusual for a business owner to be trapped in their own business. And maybe that's okay. If they're making $500,000 a year and living the life, then that's okay. But there are a lot of businesses that are making a nice living, but they've forgotten why they got in business in the first place. And they kind of lost that spark. One of the evidences of that, if somebody goes home from work and they're tired, that's because they maybe worked hard and they're tired. If they go home and they're tired and they feel unfulfilled, then that's real evidence that they're kind of trapped by the business. And part of the reason they get trapped is I'll call it the I've got that syndrome. Most business owners, when they start their business, they say, some problem comes up and they say, I've got it, I've got that. And so what they do is they build this cage around themselves and they get trapped with busyness, with doing the same things they've been doing, trapped by the familiar. And so I've always had business owner clients. Everybody does. You have some that are thinking about being on a podcast but never can pull the chain and get on the podcast with you. And so I've always had that. And I went to the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas. And I said, what do you have as a brain center for the healthy brain of a business owner? And because I didn't know what a brain center did, was it all medical? What in the world was this? So I learned about their protocols. I took their training. It was so good that I had everybody in my firm take the training. And if that wasn't enough, I went back and have a contractual agreement with them to be able to deliver their science through Mindsmarts to business owners, my own client base, and others. And basically, the science says that if you learn to think differently about things that are important to you, you actually grow brain cells. Because if you want to build your bicep, you're going to get a dumbbell and you're going to work your muscle, right? So when you want to work your brain, you can't shake your head. You've got to take on strong, important, difficult challenges that get you to something that's going to move your needle. It's not about, boy, I handled 200 emails today. You don't feel good about that because you're going to have 200 tomorrow. So what you do is you figure out where you're going, you get real clarity on that, and that comes from using your brain, and you have clarity about it, and then you plan things every day that move you a step closer to moving your needle. That's what Mind Smarts is all about. And the some of it is the same stuff your grandmother talked to you about. And but it's got a scientific background. They can prove that you grow brain cells when you use your brain in a certain way. Henry, our brain is this little bit of our body, but it takes 20% of our nutrients every day, 20% of our hydration, about 12% of our blood flow through this little thing between our ears. It's a very hungry organ. And when you learn that and learn to use it properly, you can make better decisions. You can look at a business problem, analyze it more deeply, analyze it in greater breadth as well, bring in your own experience and knowledge to it, look at it from an emotional standpoint. You can take all of these elements and come up with a much better problem definition and alternate solutions. And when you have that mind smart kind of approach to things, you also encourage your curiosity and your innovation. So a lot of the things that we do at Kepner CPA, just instead of being a stodgy old CPA firm, we drink our own Kool-Aid, of course, and we use our brains in a different way so that we come up with solutions for clients, individual kinds of products, things that we can put in our arsenal for our business clients. And it's an interesting journey to your brain. I've traveled to 22 different countries, but my journey into my own brain was probably one of the strangest and most interesting, challenging trips that I've ever taken. And so when somebody pays attention to their brain and they know where they're going, they gain clarity and focus, then they really can achieve way more than they could when they don't pay attention to that. Didn't
Wow,
mean
that is really.
didn't mean to get on my soapbox about that, but
Hey, I'm glad you did because that's a company you've started and you've integrated it with your CPA firm and you have clients and people want to hear about that. And sometimes the obvious things can be overlooked. It's very obvious that one of the most important things is how you think because that determines everything in your life and how your brain behaves. We don't think about it, but it's causing us to breathe, causing us to move our hands around and walk. So, of course, it's very helpful to. I think we talked about this when we got to know each other, but I actually spent 5 years as an NLP certified practitioner trainer. A different approach, but same idea. The brain is very important, and there's the conscious, and there's subconscious, and there's patterns, and there's changing patterns, and I love it.
yeah, people do ask me, particularly when the last Trump big beautiful tax bill came out, they said, Kepner, why are you talking about the brain? Shouldn't you be reading the big beautiful tax bill every night and talking about that? I already know a lot of that stuff and know how to find out answers I don't. But the brain is so fascinating. It's such a beneficial activity for people to begin to think about it. And Mark Cuban recently said, whatever you don't lose your curiosity. When you learn to think well and open up your mind to a whole variety of different thoughts and different thinking patterns, you become, if you're not curious, you become curious. If you already are, you strengthen your whole innovation, the way you look at things. And it starts, like you said a minute ago, it really starts with a thought. In fact, everything we do starts with a thought. So if we are thinking differently about things that are important to us, we grow our brain cells. That's the science. And we become better decision makers.
Maybe that's a good time to wrap up, unless you have something else to add. If you have a good story about how you helped, maybe without names, but I know you've got testimonials on your website, but someone who made some changes in the business and got their personal life in balance. And I'm sure you have some stories like that. Maybe made more money for themselves and their customers as well.
I will tell you two stories. One is my own. Once I paid attention to brain health, we doubled our profits. we had a 25% revenue and growth without adding people. And I saved a third of my time in a CPA practice. Now, I'm forward thinking, so I've reinvested that in working on Mindsmarts and incorporating that and other things. But I saved a tremendous amount of time. And that gives me time to think instead of just being busy. I'm thinking about a particular client that their whole business was waiting on the next sale. They're not a retail company, but they were just waiting for somebody that had a particular kind of issue to come in. And because that's all they did, whenever those people didn't come in, they had losses. And so we've concentrated in their case on developing a wider net for these customers to come in, and with the idea that if it get overloaded, they have a way to compensate for that. But they haven't had a way until now of compensating for the underloading of their facilities and their people and their staff. In that particular case, a great little family held company doing about $2.5 million a year, and a big change in their profitability by changing the way that they cast their net and solving the problem, what if I get too much, by building their resources to be able to come in on a part-time basis to cover their added volume. They're not facing the same problem, which was just sitting around with nothing to do, waiting for that next customer. There are a number of examples like that. I'm coaching a couple of financial advisors right now, and in their case, it's more teaching them to be really strategic in who they are and what they want to accomplish. One of those guys is 60. So he says, I've got one more shot to really build my business. And so we're defining what that one more shot looks like. And he's thinking strategically about his business rather than just selling the next client. So that's what happens. It's a shift in thinking to a more strategic long-term approach, and the great benefits come from it.
Really fantastic. KepnerCPA.com, Kepner. And what a pleasure to spend some time with you on the podcast. And thank you for coming on, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Henry Harrison's Entrepreneurs, Business and Finance podcast here on YouTube. Remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also search Henry Harrison Podcast on your favorite podcast platforms.